I'm Scott Munn, along with Tug Coward in the Warrior Alliance Network studios in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, we're honored to welcome Mr. Brian Boutte, a West Point graduate and former U.S. Army captain who served 5 years in uniform before launching a distinguished career in the private sector. In 2020, Brian joined Chick-fil-A as Global Director of Community Engagement, helping expand into new markets and support international growth. Today, he's the Director of Government Relations for the organization. Before Chick-fil-A, Brian held executive leadership roles across global operations, sales, and marketing with major companies, including Mobil Oil, the Coca-Cola Company, and over 15 years at GE General Electric. Mr. Boutte continues to serve with purpose as the newest member of the Warrior Alliance Board of Directors, a trustee for Breakthrough Atlanta, and trustee emeritus at the Lovett School. It's a privilege to spotlight a veteran who's not only had success after service, but is still giving back to the military community in powerful ways. Brian Boutte of Chick-fil-A, thank you for your service to our country, and welcome to the Warrior Alliance Network, sir.
Scott, look, thank you. That's a very generous introduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
But look, with the things that you've done, I mean, it's warranted. We have so many people on, and I'm always moved by what people that come on these shows have done and what they continue to do. It just shows the strength of our veteran community. It shows the strength and the just the ability that we have as Americans to do good. Chick-fil-A, one of my favorite places in the world. What's the first question people ask you when they find out you work at Chick-fil-A? Can I get one of them little cards for a free sandwich?
Second question, right? Okay. The first one is, how did you get in?
Okay.
Right? It's often it's a bit of a journey, the selection process at Chick-fil-A. So that's generally the first question. Second one is a card. What do you like to eat? And it's typically for me, it's the spicy chicken.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
I'm a big fan of
spicy
so
chicken
good.
is great.
Me too.
What's your order, Tug?
Buddy, I always go with either just the spicy chicken combo or a regular old combo, and I rotate between, but I never deviate. You know, and then breakfast, always the chicken, egg, and cheese burrito.
Nice.
Never deviate.
Nice.
Look at you.
I was eating the salads on the road because that salad and that fruit is like the healthiest stuff you can get when traveling. You know, it's really fresh, right?
Yeah.
And then now, though, I got to admit, I get that 30-count nuggets and I store some back. I keep a little in reserve.
Yeah.
That's my son's
son.
Yeah, he's
That's
27. Good. I think he tries to get one for every year he's been on the planet. So he gets a 30 count.
I'm telling you, I've wiped out one of those platters before, and it happens before you know it.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
they're just gone. You'd be like, oh my heaven,
you just keep doing it.
What have I done?
You just keep doing it.
That's right. Exactly.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Just eat more.
And while we're on Chick-fil-A, though, I got to compliment that drive-through line, strongest operation outside of the military there is, I think. Don't you? I mean, it's amazing.
You know, it's a marvel. To me, it looks like a carousel. I drive by, and I know I'm never going to wait long, but I'm always amazed at how many cars get through that drive-through.
And how quickly and efficiently orders are right, people are smiling. It's the most pleasant. You know, my pleasure has become such a staple. And you always listen for it, at least I do, waiting on somebody to say my pleasure. You know, thank you so much, because I always try to be polite too. My pleasure is always the answer.
Good.
And it's always I don't think, and I don't say this because you're here, I don't think I've ever had a bad experience at Chick-fil-A, ever in my life.
Good to hear.
And believe me, one of the early on Chick-fil-A's were in my hometown of Dalton, Georgia, in Walnut Square Mall. It was when Chick-fil-A first started putting them in malls, right? And this was early on. My aunt went to church with Mr. Cathy down at Jonesboro First Baptist, and I just remember, so I had little bitty connections to I've always had it. I didn't know that there was a time or a place that you couldn't get Chick-fil-A, because it had always been part of what I'd done and who I'd been. And
you lived a good life, man.
Yeah, yes, sir. Blessed, I would say.
Now, speaking of connections, Tug, and you mentioned your son, and that brings me to this interesting connection that Mr. Boutte and I have. I'm the son of an Army officer, retired, retired as Lieutenant Colonel Duncan P. Munn. And when he was a captain from 77 through 80, he taught at West Point, and I was a kid at West Point. Both my brothers were born there. And you happened to have gone to school what years?
I was there between 78 and 82, so I remember your father, right?
That's so amazing.
I remember the English class. The professor I had was a very different guy than your father. He had a reputation for making sure some of the folks didn't get through his. Well, you got to know that West Point has changed, though. So back then, it was a nutrition program. So the class we brought in 80 and 78 was about 1,400 cadets. We graduated 836.
Wow.
So they've changed that program. So now what they realize, you spent all this time and effort to bring in the top candidates. why are you trying to run them out?
Yeah, right.
So now it's a program around excellence. So they'll graduate less than maybe 18% will trip out of that class versus back in the old days, right? Half the class would make it through. But by design, which was a horrible waste of resource when you think about the effort to bring in the best class and then to lose half of them in the process. So it's changed.
Well, not everybody made it through, but we were talking before the show about a couple of your classmates that my dad wanted to know how they did because they didn't have, social media to track them later. And you were telling me that who was the fellow?
It was Gerald Bennett. Gerald Bennett was a recruited quarterback. So he is, I think, from Beaumont, Texas. I grew up in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is about 6 to 8 miles away, right on I-10. Right?
Yeah.
And so I met Gerald on the flight out of Houston to New York. So there was a direct flight from Houston on Eastern Airlines. So we had one-way tickets on Eastern Airlines into LaGuardia. And so I met Gerald Bennett then. And so Gerald and I got to be pretty good friends at West Point.
And my dad was saying he came for football, and he was definitely heavy on football and lighter on academics at first, but that the faculty there really helped with his training and his education. And you were telling me now he had an Army career, and now he's...
Yeah, I think he's at the VA now. I think he's at the VA benefits. He may have started a firm on the side. One of the things about West Point at the time was this. Most of the professors were military officers, and there were a few civilians. So what that meant was that they were on duty 24/7. So if you needed help, you can get what we called it then AI, additional instruction. So if Gerald needed help, you just raise your hand, and that captain, major, or colonel would make themselves available to you. So that was a unique part about West Point, that if you wanted help, you can get help. So not everybody got through that place on their own. It takes cooperation to graduate. That was typically the motto. But I distinctly remember just, hey, I need some help, and you get it.
Now, what inspired you, sir, to attend West Point? And looking back, did that West Point experience shape your career both in the Army and later in the private sector?
Yeah, so I'm 7 of 10 kids. So there's 7 boys and 3 girls in my family. And all of my brothers served except for one. He had asthma, so he wasn't allowed to serve, right? But they had all served. So I'd seen my brothers go in the Air Force and the Army and the Navy. So it wasn't an uncommon thing to think about service. But I got into West Point, quite honestly, it was a bit of a lark. I wasn't trying to go to West Point. I had a full ride to go to Georgia Tech on a ROTC scholarship. So I was planning to come to Atlanta to do engineering at Georgia Tech. So what happened was I'm working at a car wash, and the district attorney would come to get his car washed. So he and I got to be friends. So he mentioned to me one day, he said, listen, Boutte, where are you going? Going to Georgia Tech, want to be an engineer, serve in the Army. He said, fine. He said, have you ever considered West Point? I said, I haven't really, but my brother had an appointment to the Naval Academy. He eventually went to the Air Force. But I said, no, I haven't. He said, do me a favor. You'll get a phone call. So I got a phone call from the DA at school. The principal's nervous. The district attorney was talking to Boutte, get in here. So I'll go and we have the conversation. He said, listen, I'd like for you to meet Congressman John Breaux, later became U.S. Senator Breaux. So I go to the federal building, the post office, and I met my congressman for the first time. He said, listen, son, seeing your records, you've done okay in school. We think this would be a good idea for you to consider West Point. So that happened on a Friday. The following Monday, I get a phone call from D.C. It's Congressman Breaux's office. Someone would give me a nomination to West Point, Air Force, Coast Guard, Navy, and we decided you should go to West Point. I said, well, who's the we, sir?
Yeah,
well,
right.
The owner of the car wash, the guy that I work with. He said, so we decided. And really, so I got into West Point. I was all set to go to Georgia Tech, and quite honestly, between Georgia Tech and West Point, it wasn't much of a decision. I told my dad I flipped the coin and I lost. But really, that's how it happened. I wanted to serve, so I was destined to serve through the ROTC program, but an opportunity to go to West Point, I mean, how do you say that?
Yeah, no, it's such an honor to be to given those opportunities to any of the academies, really. I mean, they're because we know, 3 or 4 kids that are at Army. I know a couple kids that are at Air Force out in Colorado that are, also play.
Place,
oh my gosh, gorgeous.
The scenery is gorgeous.
Playing football out there, and
don't bring up football being a Navy guy because we're not going to get along about that.
Well, we did win. Navy did win this last year, so
we'll give it to you.
But a couple years prior to that, there was a couple years, and then there was that 14-year run of Navy domination. But we don't got to get it.
We have a short memory in the Army.
My kids never thought Army had ever beat Navy for 14 years. They had never seen a win. I said, trust me, guys, we've won. So, of course you did that.
Yeah, so, right, whatever. Yeah, no, that's funny.
But what I always like to point out is that at the end of that game, the 2 service academies, they get to sing, and everybody kind of reunites as the armed forces.
They're comrades in arms.
That's right.
That's right. The best of the best that our country has.
Talk about the difference now between cadets entering West Point and what it was like when you went in. Is there a difference in the cadets themselves, do you think?
I think there is. but probably at the core, not much. So I think the difference now is when I went in, there was really no war looming, right? And so if you walked in there in the 80s, you're probably pretty certain you're going to be okay. But the 90s and 2000s, there was a pretty good chance you were going to end up somewhere where there was some sand, right? Whether you're going to be in Iraq or in Afghanistan. So to walk into any service academy at that point, that speaks a lot about their patriotism. And, duty on the country is the motto, but when you walk in there and we're at war, you're about to put that into practice. So I think that's one difference. But I think the second difference is, look, the place is different. I mentioned earlier that it was a nutrition program, but back when I went there, the old days, there was no major program, right? So the first class that got a major at West Point was the class of 1985. Back then, you had an area of concentration. So think of those guys that graduated in the 70s and 60s and beyond. They still went on to earn PhDs and become CEOs, but they didn't have a bachelor's of science in any particular field of study. They're an area of concentration. So in 85 was the first class. So I think there are like 62 majors at West Point. All the academies have done the same. But when I got there was still one class that was all men. So the class 79 was still the last all-male class at West Point. So they're just trying to figure out, how to make this thing work with the class now that had women in. So I think they got better. The other thing that's different now is that there's a lot more freedom, right? The place is a bit more collegial than it was back when I was there. And I think that's a good thing, right? But it's a challenge. When you leave home and you go to any one of those academies, you're in a bit of a little, let's say, an enclosed environment with a lot of controls taken away from you, right?
Sure.
You get to do exactly what you're told, when you're told, the way you're told to do it. And so I think that experience is the same regardless of whether you got there in 78 or you got there in 2018. Mm-hmm. I think they're smarter. I mean, if we were to line up the kids that got into West Point when I got there with the records of the kids that got in this last year, we wouldn't be it. I mean, the standards are so high. But
it's just so different.
It's
just so different.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you that your class is gone on to do great things. You've done great things. You worked for GE and Coca-Cola, Mobile, and now Chick-fil-A. What's the key though? What helps you be successful? What's guided your success in all those places?
So it's probably no one thing. I think this idea of being in a situation where you have to manage chaos, kind of what the military gives you to do. We put you in jobs with really no training and say, okay, now you're now in charge. And to rely on other folks was probably the first lesson I learned, right? You make an assessment. You had to figure out really quickly, what are you good at, right? And it's almost like stay in your lane, but what are you good at? If you're really good at operations, then stay in your lane with operations as long as you can, right? And so when you make these transitions out of the military, it's important that you know exactly what you're good at. So what's my A skill? Maybe what's B and what's C? It's hard to make a C and A, right? But if you're really good at manufacturing and you need folks that are good at operations, then lean into that. But if that happens when you're 25 versus when you're 55, so when your father leaves as a colonel, they want a very different skill set from lieutenant colonel than they want from a young captain, right? And so be willing to learn, right? And one of the advantages, I walked in as a young captain. I left the Army and went to work for Mobil Oil, actually Mobil Chemical at the time. And I took a job as a sales rep. So the reason I took that job was I knew I could have a pretty good chance of selling folks because I can build relationships. I was confident no one would work harder than me. I was going to make more calls than the other guys, so I got out of my bed. I was making calls at 7 in the morning until 6 or 7 at night. Back then there were no cell phones, right? So you had a pager. So I knew I could outwork most folks. And if I outworked them, I would learn the business, right? If I can get close enough to the customer, I can learn the business. Well, if you do that at 45, I don't need you to be that close to the customer at 45. I need you to have some systems understanding. I need you to be able to cast a vision. Can you get folks to buy into the vision, and can you build a path so folks might follow you, right? So fellowship is harder at 45 than it is at 25. 25, you're walking as you got a little gold bar. They kind of know you're the captain, the lieutenant. That's not that difficult. And you got a pretty good non-commissioned officer to make sure you don't do anything really stupid.
Right. Yeah.
So you can screw it up, but you got to try to screw it up, quite honestly.
It's got to put effort into it.
Because some other folks are going to kind of
you got the bumpers.
It's like, hey, that's probably not a good move.
You got the bowling bumpers
That's
up.
right. You really do, right? So you're bowling it with an alley that has some lanes. But I think success requires confidence when you leave the military, just the surety of what you're good at. And then more than that, knowing why you're good at it, right? It's one thing to know you're good, but do you know why? Can you repeat it? Can you teach it, right? Can you get folks to accept that this is the way to get things done? In addition to that, there are other ways as well, but this is a good way, right? You don't ever exclude other possibilities of getting a solution that makes sense.
It's almost like sports a little bit, a repeatable action You know, whether it's football or baseball, you're trying to do exceptionally well every time you put a swing down or every time you form tackle. You're trying to repeat it.
Do the same thing every day, right? If you can get really good at the basics, right? Do the simple stuff well, and then build on those, right?
When folks get out of the military, there's all kinds of opportunities out there because I think people appreciate military service. Chick-fil-A, what is their relationship to veterans and their families? Are they very inviting? I assume the answer is yes.
So the company was founded by a veteran, right? So Dan Capt, his father Truett, was a veteran, left the Army as an E4 during World War II. His brother Ben actually served in, I think he served in Italy, but he was definitely in theater. And so what Dan has done since Truett has passed away is that just make sure that this place is accessible, right? So today, you might be surprised, but there are about 200 owner-operators that are military vets. From an E5, from a sergeant to a retired 2-star Air Force General out in San Antonio. So Florida Carpenter has 2 restaurants. And so the reason that makes sense for us is that, number one, service, right? Understand leadership. We understand how to train folks. We understand how to pour into things that are bigger than you. And so all those things kind of line up perfectly with the work that we do, right? Again, we select about 120 owner-operators out of maybe 100,000 that might express interest. So to get through that screen, you have to have something that's special. And part of it is, are you dedicated to service, right? And that kind of translates pretty easily into Chick-fil-A. So we do pretty well with veterans. We're always looking for more veterans, right? So we've been successful today with the 200 more. But there are probably a few hundred folks on staff as well that are veterans. So
spouses, how does that play in? Because but they've been part of the military experience too often.
You know, it's interesting. If you're an owner-operator, your spouse is kind of by your side, right? It's hard to do that if your spouse isn't aligned with it, right? So whether you've served 5 years or 20 years, that relationship of this is the family and we are going to pour into each other in this work, being an owner-operator at Chick-fil-A is the same, right? No one person does that alone. It is a team, right? We'll often say, you're in business for yourself but not by yourself, right? Because you have the system behind you, but that your spouse is that is a very important ally and partner if you get that right. So my wife and I, we married for 33 years. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Jennifer and I have seen some things over the years.
Sure.
Right? She's made a move or two with me, but the relationship of having your best friend to bounce these crazy ideas off, to pick you up when things aren't going as well, because you don't hit home runs every day. Sometimes there are no base hits for a while when you're in a slump. So my best friend is my wife, Jennifer. So we're blessed. We have 2 kids. I don't know if I tell you this. So I have a son that's 27, Matthew, and Marilyn's 25. So neither chose the academies, and I pushed. I tried. They wouldn't even apply. I said, guys, just simply apply. Do the old man a favor. Yeah. So Marilyn went to Chapel Hill, and Matthew went to Michigan. Fine schools that they've done.
Sure
well.
they are.
But I couldn't get any of them to
bite.
Yeah, they looked at me and said, "You good?"
Well, you served, and now they get to go and do something freedom in America because of folks like you. And we're talking to Brian Boutte, Chick-fil-A Director of Government Relations. And recently, you joined the Warrior Alliance as the member of the board of directors. We want to know what drew you to that role, and how have you seen the Warrior Alliance making an impact in the veteran community?
Yes, so a couple things. So number one, I've known Max Hillsman for a while. So Max and I have been, Max another West Point grad, so Max and I have been friends for a bit. So he told me about this work, and I'd kind of seen it kind of tangentially. But I have a brother who's a retired sergeant major, and he was actually working to get his benefits. And at around the same time this was going on, I didn't know fully whether I was going to be on the board or not. I knew I'd be involved. And so I got involved again by having Chick-fil-A. We'd feed some of the guys at the PAC meeting. So I got to know some folks, got to know Jared a little bit. I said, okay, fine, this looks like good work. And then when my brother was struggling with his benefits, I said, well, I know some guys that do this work. So and as Max and I were talking more about the board, it happened to be at the same time when my brother was going through his challenges getting his benefits. So I said, look, let me see if I can help. And so I came on board with 2 thoughts in mind. Number one, I think it's a pity that veterans leave their benefits on the table. They've earned them. Literally, they've earned them. They have a right to them. And to not have access because the system is cumbersome or awkward or challenging or frustrating, that's a miss on our part. So if there are veterans willing to help veterans, that's the first thing. But the second thing was that I think that there are systems that can be built, and TWA is doing a great job with this, that how do you make this more accessible, but how do you make it just easier, right? This idea of having a Navigator, it's a game changer, right? And so the more I got to see and understand, the more it made sense to me. And so I've applied for my benefits, right?
That's what we're hearing.
Yeah.
And walk through that process.
Yeah, so Scott, who's the CEO, said, Boutte, you need to figure this out. You need to understand what this is. And so I did it for one reason. First of all, so I can have the experience to tell folks this is what it's like, right? So
Sure.
if you're going to tell folks to eat the cooking, maybe you ought to taste it yourself, right?
Sure.
So I said, let me go through it, right? So recently I met with the VSO down in Chattahoochee. So my packet is in, my file is in. I've seen notes come back from my doctor, request my medical records. I'm sure there's nothing I'm going to qualify for. That wasn't the point. The point was to get into the system and understand how it works. So I've been through the process, and the team here was fantastic. So I would tell any veteran, number one, pride will get you in a lot of trouble and keep you from a lot of benefits. It's okay to ask. I have another brother who is an Air Force vet who served in Vietnam, who, again, finally got him into the process because, again, just too proud to ask for any help.
Wow. That's the thing is, if you're listening out there, whether you think your benefits are at 100% or not, it's time to check in because there's new things. There's the PACT Act, and the Warrior Alliance, like you said, have all these navigators who will help you figure it out. And you can just go sign up at thewarrioralliance.org, thewarrioralliance.org, and let them tell you what you don't know. You know, you don't have to. You have a friend out there, and it's at the Warrior Alliance. And you know, there's probably a veteran listening right now who's hearing your story of success, and they're wondering how they can achieve that same level or get close to that kind of a career. Maybe they want to level up in their career, or they're looking for a new path. What advice would you give to any veteran listening? What's some starter advice, something they can do right now to kind of get on the right path or level up or find a career like yours?
Yeah. So a few things. So number one, be really, really introspective and do an assessment. What is it that you're good at? What is it that you like? If there's something you would do for free, what would that be, right? What are the activities that kind of get you out of bed in the morning? You can talk about your purpose or what causes you to want to do the work. Maybe you think of it differently. Maybe you think, what would I want said about me when this is over, right? What impact would I want to leave, right? Who would I want to make the world better for? And if it's just the folks in the neighborhood, that's fine. But start with those questions, right? Because I think if you don't know why you want to do it, it's kind of hard to get up every day, right? So the why is important. But also knowing what you bring to the party. What skills do I have? What have I been successful at? And start with those things. And then, look, the beauty today is that you can talk to anybody, right? With social media, you can go on LinkedIn and find folks that are working in space you want to work and have conversations. Talk to folks before you walk in, right? My process for getting into the corporate America was a search firm called Cameron Brooks. So they took young military officers right out, and they took you to a hotel, and they interviewed with like 15 companies, right? So it was real easy. Mine was almost kind of catered. I could walk in and see Mobil and GE and Procter & Gamble. That was easy. Those organizations exist, but they don't exist at the same levels they did back when I went through. So if you leave in the Army, so there's Soldier for Life, there's the Career Skills Bridge, where you can spend the last 6 months of your active duty working in corporate America, paid for by the U.S. military. So the company that takes you has nothing to pay, right? And so you get to learn. There are some young folks that now work at Chick-fil-A. Young man was here in Atlanta. He's actually stationed at Fort Benning now. And he came and he took a job at Chick-fil-A, actually working in our selection, franchise selection. So after 6 months, he got a job here. So but the first 6 months, he worked for Chick-fil-A at no cost because the military paid for it. It's a wonderful program. So if you're still active, Career Skills Bridge is a great pathway to do a transition that allows you to get into corporate America. And it's a beauty for the military because it reduced the amount of unemployment that the federal government pays because why are you getting out? But the second thing is that transition to having camaraderie. So you're not leaving all of your connections and walking out to this place by yourself. So I think that's important. And the second thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? Come to the Warrior Alliance, right? We can help you with something. But more than that, get online and say, listen, if I'm good at these things, where could I go to work, right? And raise your hand. I'm convinced if you know what you want to do, if you know what you're good at, if you're willing to spend a little time doing the research, right, it's available. The things that are available online today, you can literally research any company. You can look for any job opening. What I found now is that LinkedIn will post job openings, right? So you can literally find a job through LinkedIn. But talk to veterans that are in the space where you want to be, right? So I would tell any person getting out today, you can go online and see where veterans are working and raise your hand.
And work with the Warrior Alliance because I'm like you, never used a VA benefit one. At some point, I'm going to put my own.
Oh, you haven't started yet?
I'm going to go through the process for sure.
You need to.
But you say it, you're so right in it. Veterans are so. veterans are so reluctant to ask for help because they've always been the person providing the help. We were at a Braves game with my son, and they were doing the stand-up if you're a veteran. I never stand up. And he was
Really?
like, never. And he was like, why not? And I was like, I don't know. I don't want any attention. I don't want this attention.
I don't know, Tug. Right now, I think we both want to challenge you. We need you to stand up at that moment because people need to see that. They need to see you stand up.
I just don't. I don't want the. I think most veterans feel that way, where they don't want the attention on them. Yeah. I really do believe that most veterans feel that way.
That's understandable, but you're doing a disservice to those that serve if you don't stand up.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, my son tells me the same thing, so I'm going to do better.
Yeah,
there you go.
Do better. Just stand up. That's
all I need to do is to do better. Stand up.
Just stand up.
We got to wrap here, but you got like a one sentence or a nutshell on what you see as the future of the Warrior Alliance?
Yeah, I think when we get it right, the Warrior Alliance will be a partner with the VA. That it'll be seamless. That we will be the best route to getting your benefits with the least amount of friction if you partner with the Warrior Alliance. I think that's where we'll be. We will be in every state at some point, making services available to any veteran, regardless of when they serve.
That's the elevator pitch of all elevator pitches right there.
There you go.
That's I think that summarizes it so well, Brian. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been time with you guys.
Yeah. It's so much fun. I hope it won't be the last time we get to talk to you.
My pleasure, Doug.
We'll see you at Chick-fil-A.
All right, fantastic.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
My pleasure.